Hello, everybody. Nick Paynes here from the Meta Homes team. This message is for all of my friends and family and my past, current, and future clients. I wanted to talk a little bit about the National Association of Realtors settlement from March 15th. So it's been about a month, almost a month, since National Association of Realtors made a settlement in their lawsuit for $418 million. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what that lawsuit was about and what it means for sellers, what it means for buyers, how it affects real estate agents, and just kind of maybe overcome some of the false narrative that's out there from the media and what we're seeing in our industry. And so, first of all, the to talk a little bit about what the lawsuit was about, essentially a class action lawsuit that stemmed out of Missouri. And there's now been a bunch of copycat lawsuits and things like that, basically saying that there was collusion, price setting, and that commissions were exorbitantly high, and that they were not negotiable, and buyers and sellers were being forced, really sellers were being forced to pay exorbitantly high commissions that were not negotiable. And what happened is that during this lawsuit, and since the lawsuit was settled, a lot of the big companies, so specifically Remax was one of the first companies to settle out the lawsuit, not due to an admission of guilt, but more for the matter of protecting the company and getting us in a position where these copycat lawsuits couldn't come after us. At the time of the settlement, it was a questionable thing, but as things progressed and as we really figured out the size of the lawsuit, it ended up being a tremendously much bigger figure than Remax settled for, and it ended up being a smart thing on Remax's behalf. So Remax, Compass, and a few other companies ended up settling out. And then the National Association of Realtors, their settlement covered basically any members of the National Association of Realtors and any brokerage firms or companies that did less than $2 billion in volume. So any of the big companies that were not covered by the lawsuit still have to kind of settle their own thing. But essentially, the final settlement and the final judgment will come in July, and many of the changes that have been brought about will come in July. So the changes that we'll see here in Colorado, it's almost, there's not very much that changes from this massive lawsuit. The one big thing that changes from this lawsuit, or I should say there are two big things that change from this lawsuit. The first thing is that when you're looking on the MLS as a broker, when we see a listing on the MLS, we can see what's called a co-op commission. It's the commission that's being offered to the buyer's agent for that buyer or for that agent to bring their buyer to the house and sell the property. That is no longer allowed. You can no longer post a cooperative commission on the MLS. Okay? It doesn't mean you can't offer it. It just means that you can no longer post it on the MLS. It can be posted somewhere else. It can be posted on your own website. It can be communicated to the other agent verbally. It can be sent in an email. It just cannot be posted on the MLS. Okay? The second thing that happens is that all buyers and buyers agents now must have an agency agreement prior to even seeing homes. So in the past, what we would do in Colorado is we would provide what we call a brokerage disclosure to buyer, which would basically tell the buyer how we could represent them. And so we have four types of representation here in Colorado. We have seller's agency, buyer's agency, transaction broker, and customer. So your seller's agency creates agency between you and a seller, and your fiduciary responsibility is to that seller. You negotiate and advocate and advise on behalf of the seller. Buyer's agency is the same thing, just with the buyer side. Transaction broker is basically a third-party intermediary between a buyer and a seller that offers no advice or negotiation on either behalf. It's just the obligation of the broker to disclose any material facts about the transaction. And the last piece is a customer. A customer does not actually have representation. You would have a customer in let's say in an example of if I was a seller's agent and was selling a home, somebody came into an open house and said, hey, I'm unrepresented, but I'd like to buy this house. Would you just put the contract together for me? And so we basically execute paperwork on their behalf, but we still advise the seller and don't advise the buyer in that case. Okay. So before, we just had to disclose that those were the ways that we could represent a buyer or a seller in the real estate market. Moving forward now, we have to have a buyer's agency agreement to even show a home. So we have to create agency between our buyers. In my eyes, this somewhat hurts the buyer pool. This hurts the consumer when it comes to a buyer, because when I have worked with buyers in the past, I've shown them homes, I've gone in and had multiple conversations with them before I've asked for any type of commitment or agency agreement with me, which is what we call an exclusive right. It means that once you sign that agreement with me, I'm the only agent that you can use. And so I don't ask for that commitment out of my buyers right up front. The first time I meet them, the first time we meet at a house, I don't think it's fair to do that from a consumer. I believe that the consumer should have the ability to shop around and find the best agent that's meant for them. So the buyer agency agreement needing to be in place right up front is somewhat of a difficult thing that we have to start creating now, and it gives the client a little bit less opportunity to shop through agents and see how agents show houses and get a good fit. So those are the two big things that have changed with this lawsuit. Unfortunately, after the lawsuit came out, part of the settlement agreement was that the settlement would allow the National Association of Realtors to make a statement prior to anything else getting out, and the media allowing the lawsuit allowing the media to come out and make statements prior to the National Association of Realtors. Now, unfortunately, that was not followed in the settlement, and the media got a hold of it before the National Association of Realtors could come out and make a statement. And the media has completely miscommunicated the lawsuit and what it means. And even President Biden came out and made a statement saying that all the settlement, that this settlement was a step in the right direction, and that for the first time it makes commissions negotiable, or that it makes commissions negotiable for the very first time. First of all, that is not true. Commissions have always been negotiable on the real estate side. Now, you may run into a particular broker that is not willing to negotiate their commission. A lot of times I'm one of those brokers. Okay. I know what my value is. I know what I bring to the table. And many times I will not negotiate my commission. So if I come in to sell your house and I say, this is the price, you say, are you negotiable? I will say, I am not. Commissions are negotiable. There are agents out there that'll sell your home for 1%. I am not one of them. Okay. And then I present my value, and you can understand why I charge what I charge. It's no different than going to a car dealership. There's many car dealerships that will haggle and will negotiate their price. There are some that will not. Okay, and so the reality is commissions have always been negotiable. Now, through this process, a lot of people and the media have made the National Association of Realtors come out like a villain in this. And the reality is not only does the National Association of Realtors help real estate agents and real estate brokers, okay, but they're also advocates and lobbyists for policies that promote homeownership and protect property rights. So they're not just a realtor faced or a real estate agent faced community or board. They are an association that protects consumer rights and protects and lobbies for many of the laws that we have in place that make home ownership for the average consumer, or for any consumer for that matter, a very profitable and a very, I guess, a very profitable and a very marketable endeavor. And so the idea is that owning property and owning real estate in the United States, first of all, the statistic is that homeowners are 40 times or have 40 times the net worth of renters. Okay, and it's not necessarily because of the size of their bank accounts or the size of their retirement accounts. It's because of home ownership and the value of being able to purchase at high amounts of leverage, being able to purchase a property at 97% leverage, okay, and take an asset that you can leverage at 97% and have it appreciate. Okay, and so the National Association of Realtors is not just for us; it's also a consumer. It also benefits the consumers. Okay, they create a lot of education for real estate brokers, and help us to make sure that we're serving our clients properly. So the National Association of Realtors is not the villain here. The reality is that there were a couple of brokers there, just like in any profession, there are a handful of brokers doing things the wrong way. Okay. Now, one thing I like about the state of Colorado is that first of all, like I said, commissions have always been negotiable, and it's very clear on our agency agreements that commissions are negotiable and that commissions are not set. In fact, we have lines and that commissions are disclosed as to what the buyer's agent is being paid. So in our Colorado real estate agreement and our exclusive right to sell agreement, we have blank lines that we fill in that here's how much you're paying your agent and here's how much of that is going to a cooperative broker. Okay. Other states may not have that clarity in their contracts, and a lot of that is potentially what caused this lawsuit. So Colorado isn't heavily affected by this. Okay, so I want to move into how this will affect sellers, buyers, and real estate agents. Okay, in order to talk about how this affects sellers and buyers, I want to start with the history of a buyer's agent and where buyer's agents came from. So buyer's agents are relatively in the real estate world are relatively new kind of phenomenon. And the idea here is that back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, okay, what would happen is somebody would hire a real estate agent. They generally pay around 6% commission to sell their house. And that real estate agent, it was their job to go out and find a buyer for that home and sell it. And so a lot of times what would happen is that listing agent would then hire 3 or 4 other agents, which were called sub-agents at the time. Okay, so they would hire 3 or 4 other agents that would go out and try to help find buyers. And what they would do is they would pay them a portion of the commission in order to do that. So let's say they were selling a house for $100,000, they made 6%, they would make $6,000, and they would pay those sub-agents maybe $500 a piece to try to go find a buyer, maybe with a bonus to the person who finds the buyer. Now, what happened was the Federal Trade Commission found out after doing a survey it was the late 80s, early 90s, they did a survey and found that 76% of the home buyers, people that bought homes, were under the impression that the agent that they were talking to represented them. And so they falsely believed that they were being represented and that they had agency. The reality is those sub-agents worked for the listing broker, and the listing broker worked for the seller. Okay, so those people all had a fiduciary responsibility to the seller and not to the buyer. So what happened is the buyers kind of went up in arms and said, well, we want agency too. We want representation too. And thus the buyer's agent was created. So when people think that if we were to take this thing full circle and go, well, let's just not pay buyer's agents anymore. Okay, what's going to happen is it's going to go full circle and we'll end up back in the situation that we were before, where buyers just end up with no representation. Okay, so that's the history of the buyer's agents. That's where the buyer's agent came from. So let's talk about how this lawsuit will affect sellers. Okay, I don't see a huge effect on sellers, to be perfectly honest with you. Okay, when sellers, in historically speaking, sellers have paid somewhere between 2.5% to 3% commission to a buyer's agent, and generally that's negotiated by the listing agent, and it's negotiated as a full commission. So if I say I charge 6%, okay, part of that 6% is me paying a cooperative agent, 3%, half of that, or 2.8%. Okay. If the seller says, I don't want to pay a co-op agent, okay, I don't want to pay a commission to a cooperative agent, the buyers can pay their own agent. The problem that we end up having is that we end up less marketable as a property. Okay, because there's a couple things that can happen here. While agents are sign an agreement and have an agency agreement that says that you cannot, guide people and only show them homes that are paying a commission. The reality is a lot of times that standard is set by the buyer. So the buyer may say, if they sign a buyer's agency agreement with a buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent says, hey, just so you know, this is my fee. It's 2.8% of the purchase price. In the event that the seller is not paying it, you agree to pay that fee. Well, a lot of times, especially with first-time home buyers, we represent clients that don't have the ability to pay a fee for a buyer's agent. And so what they'll say is well, we still want representation because we don't know what we're doing. We've never bought a house before. We want that guidance, but we can't afford to pay that fee. We want the seller to pay for it. So please don't show us any homes where they're refusing to pay you because we can't do it. Okay, and so what happens is we start to squeeze the buyer pool. So as a seller, if you're not paying a buyer commission, what happens is we start to squeeze the buyer pool a little bit. Okay, And we end up in a situation where we lose a lot of the buyers that we would have normally had. Okay, so sellers, in my opinion, should still offer a co-op commission. Okay. Now, I think this is going to be directed in the future. This is going to be directed by what the market looks like. Okay. If we have a 2021 market where every time you put a house on the market, it sells with multiple offers, 10 offers, I don't think there's any reason uh, that you need to necessarily pay a co-op. Okay, let them negotiate it into the contract themselves. Let them, pay an additional $30,000, $40,000 for the house, and then say, hey, pay my broker as well. And you can do that. You can negotiate the commission within the contract. But if we're in a normalized market, okay, if we're in a balanced market and you're not paying a co-op commission, it's gonna be very difficult to sell your house. Even more so if we're in a buyer's market, you may end up in a situation where you need to pay more than what was the standard before. So, or what people considered the standard before, 2.8, 3% to the buyer's agent. Maybe now you have to pay 4. In fact, there were a lot of builders in Colorado over the last year and a half to 2 years that started paying higher co-op fees to the buyer's agent because they had so much inventory that they couldn't get rid of. So I think that the market is going to dictate what the seller determines they should pay the buyer's agent, and I think that that's right. I think that's the way it should be. It's how supply and demand works. Okay, so that's how I think the lawsuit is going to affect sellers. How's it going to affect buyers? Unfortunately, I think that this lawsuit damages buyers. The people who need representation the most are generally the people that can't afford or won't be able to afford, in addition to the purchase price of the property, won't be able to afford the services of and let me clarify, of a good or a great buyer's agent. Okay. There are a big part of this lawsuit, I think, stems from the fact that there are a ton of bad agents out there. They're part-time, they're not educated enough, they don't know how to properly guide their clients through the transaction, whether it be on the buy side or the sell side. And I think there's a high level of misrepresentation out there. And it's why I think it's so important as a consumer to take your time and interview multiple agents to make sure you're getting the best service possible, especially for what you're paying, and getting the highest value possible. So when you're working as a buyer and a seller, you should be talking to multiple agents, and you should be interviewing, and you should be hiring the best person for the job. You shouldn't be hiring your best friend, your cousin, your uncle, your sister, whatever it may be, unless they're the best person for the job. It's one of the first things that I tell people when I go in. I don't want you to hire me because I'm your friend. I don't take for granted. I don't take for granted the fact that you're friend or family. I appreciate the call. I want you to hire me because I'm the best person for the job. Okay. Now, what happens is we've been inundated with agents over the years because they see dollar signs, because the agents do have the ability to make very good money. Okay. But if you talk to the average agent and you find out what the average income is across the United States for agents, it's really no different, in my opinion, than any other job. If you are in the top 1% of your industry, no matter what industry you're in, you're going to make really good money. Okay. And that's the same for real estate brokers. Okay, so if you're looking at somebody is a top 1% producer in the real estate industry, and they're making really good money, they've earned that spot, and they're there for a reason. It's because they're very good at what they do. What happens with buyers now, or I should say, what happened with buyers in the past, is buyers agents didn't have to have a value proposition. They didn't have to provide much value, because what happened was, when they had the initial meeting with the buyer, all they had to do was say, here's what I'm going to show you houses, and I'll write the contract and negotiate it for you, and get you to closing, and blah blah blah. That was their value proposition. And the buyer would say, oh, and how much is that going to cost me? And they go, nothing, the seller pays it. And so the buyer goes, okay, perfect, you're hired. Well, now it's going to be a little bit different. Now I think that the buyers really need to interview their agents, and really start ahead of time before they want to see homes, okay, and talk to different agents to figure out what their value proposition is and what they're going to offer differently, and what sets them apart from all the other agents out there. No different than what we've done on the sell side all along. We've always had that proposition, that value proposition on the sell side, because we're in there earning a listing that is paying not only us, but is paying the co-op brokerage. Okay, so now moving forward, we believe that the buyers are going to have that same type of value proposition, that same conversation with their agent, to make sure that it's a good fit for them. Right. So unfortunately, what's going to happen here is if sellers start to refuse to pay co-op commissions, buyers will be on the hook for paying their buyers agents, which will make it a little bit more difficult. We already have a hard enough time from a difficulty standpoint, or from a affordability standpoint, getting new home buyers, especially, into their homes. And so if we add a commission on top of that, or we add a a payment that needs to be made to their buyer's agent on top of that, it makes it really difficult. So what's going to start happening is these buyers are going to start saying, well, I'll just self-represent. The problem with self-representation is A, they have no idea what they're doing. Okay. And I can tell you, if I'm selling a house and somebody comes as a first time home buyer and self represents and says, hey, Nick, I just want you to treat me as a customer and drop the paperwork for me, I'm going to say, okay, um, here's the reality. Are you circumventing a buyer's agent here? Because I don't just do your work for free, right? So if you want me to put together your contract, like there's a price to pay for that. And as a listing agent, I'm getting paid by my seller for doing my job on the seller side. But if you're coming to me and want me to put together all your paperwork and take on your liability for the contract, and put together your disclosures and make sure you are pre-approved and make sure all the title work is done properly and in your favor, all those things, like I'm going to get paid for that. And so what happens is we're going to have people that circumvent that. The second problem that it brings in is if people come in self-represented, is we don't get to remove the emotion from the transaction, which is a big part of what a third party does in talking their clients, whether it be sellers or buyers, off the edge. And a big example of that with buyers is when we get inspection reports back. A lot of times when we get inspection reports back, the buyer's eyes kind of bug out, like, oh my God, this house is awful. It's got all this stuff wrong with it. When in reality, as agents, we may see 20, 30, 40, 50 inspection reports per year, and we may see this and go, actually, to be honest with you, these are fairly typical items. This comes up on every house, and this is a fairly normal inspection report. And what we do is we calm our buyers to let them know that, hey, this is pretty standard stuff. Well, when you're a buyer and you've never seen an inspection report before, and you get 2 pages of items that are considered health and safety, they freak out and they back out of the contract. Okay, it takes a third party with experience that understands what an inspection report looks like to talk them off that ledge and say, hey, this isn't that bad, and this is why we have an inspection objection, to go through and try to get some of these items fixed. Okay, so it can be very problematic to not have buyers that have representation, and because of the fact that buyers will feel that it's a necessity to pay their agent, and if they don't have the funds, they're going to start self-representing. And I can tell you that self-representation in our business is not a good idea. Okay, if you've ever watched a video of somebody self-representing themselves in court, and not having a lawyer, it's a bad idea. Okay, they look bad during the transaction, and they never get what they could have gotten with an attorney, right? Because those attorneys are experienced, they know what they can ask for, they know what they can get, and there's a tremendous amount of value when you're talking about that. And we're both dealing with, on both sides, the sellers and the buyers, we're dealing with probably one of the biggest purchases and or sales of your entire life, the most amount of money that will ever be involved in a financial transaction. Okay. All right. Last thing I want to talk about is how this will affect real estate agents. Okay. For real estate agents that have experience, top producers in the industry, people that know their value and are highly educated and experts at their craft, I don't think that this lawsuit's going to affect them greatly. I really don't. I think that they'll be able to prove their value and continue to thrive in the business. People that have kind of skated by, part-time real estate agents that are kind of doing this on the side, that aren't staying educated, I don't think they'll last. I don't think they will have a value proposition. I don't think that they'll understand the things that need to get done to make sure that they get paid for their services, and I think that they'll start to fizzle out. I think it will be a much needed self-induced industry enema of people leaving the industry, and the reality is, I think that that's a good thing, because I think that the lawsuit stems from the bottom level agents that don't know how to represent a client properly. And I don't necessarily blame the consumers that were upset when they finished a transaction, saw their agent make a really big paycheck, and feel like they didn't get that amount of value out of it. And I think that it's I think that it's warranted. So this lawsuit, some may look at it as a negative thing, but I tend to look at it as a positive thing. First of all, I don't think it changes much, like we talked about. These laws have always been in place. Nothing has changed. It's just now going to create. It's going to force agents to prove their value and create a value proposition to each client. And if they can't do that, I don't think they'll make it in this business. And it will leave the professionals in the business, and it'll mean that you, as a consumer, have a much better chance of working with somebody that actually knows what they're doing. So, all right, that's it for today. Thanks for hanging around. If you watched the whole thing, hopefully this was beneficial to you. Get a better understanding of what the lawsuit's about, how it's going to affect people in the real world. And anyway, myself and my team, we look forward to any opportunity to serve you, to work with you as clients, and show you our value proposition, because we believe we have a very strong one. So hope you have a great rest of your day, great summer coming up, and please let us know if there's any way that we can serve you in the future. Thanks so much.